the very least, acknowledging. Advertisements and marketing tell us how to see the world. Let's get past the shock value and sympathy factor of incorporating people with disabilities into the things that we see every day. You can't drive down the street, pump gas, look at a bench, pass a bus, even go pee in a restaurant without seeing an advertisement. There are lots of diverse skin colors, people of all ages, and adorable pets. But how many of those advertisements do you see featuring people with disabilities? You might see a child with Down syndrome in a Target kids clothing ad used sparingly around the holidays and think, "Aw, but what about everywhere else?" Wouldn't it be great if employers could see people the way that Shallow Hal saw 400-pound Rosemary when he fell in love with her after being hypnotized by Tony Robbins to see only inner beauty? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could see people for who they truly are and for what they can do instead of forming opinions prematurely? As a supported employment vocational specialist, this would be a dream come true. While obviously I can't hypnotize employers to see my clients the way that I do, the media has mesmerizing powers. When I was growing up in the 80s, interracial relationships were predominantly seen as reprehensible, immoral, and as something that was still shocking in the media. Before the early 90s, seeing a desegregated duo as a star of anything was almost unheard of. Thankfully, for most people with even a little bit of an education, it's now simply an everyday occurrence. Showing people of the same sex as having any interest in each other still makes many uncomfortable. But the more we see it as a whole, the further forward the equal rights movement gets propelled. The National Disabilities Advocacy Network says that disability rights are the last great civil rights movement. Unfortunately, seeing a person who is disabled in nearly any scene still provides either sympathy factor or shock value. Let's make inclusion less shocking. Let's make inclusion more comfortable. Let's make inclusion mainstream. Take it to the TV, to the streets, to the buses, and in front of the toilet seats. According to DisabilityFunders.org and IMPWD.org, 20% of Americans between the ages of 5 and 64 are currently living with a disability, yet they're represented by less than 2% of characters on television, and only 0.5% of those have a speaking role. IMPWD, or Persons with Disability, is a tri-union committee bringing together the Actors Equity Association, SAG, and AFTRA to promote inclusion in the arts and media of people with disabilities. Robert David Hall is the national chair of IMPWD. He plays Dr. Robbins on CSI and is a double amputee who has made huge strides for inclusion in the media and disability rights overall. He says, "If you don't see someone who looks like you on screen, it is as if you don't exist in our culture." I was talking with John Pizzazz, the founder and director of Performing Arts Studio West, or PASW, a place whose mission states that they provide career management, individualized training, and on-location support for performers with developmental disabilities working in film, television, and commercial. John was telling me a story about his now partner, Randy Kleinberg. Some 30-plus years ago, when they were roommates, and John was working in a large day program for people with developmental disabilities, he had Randy dress up as Santa Claus and come down to the celebration that they were having. Afterwards, Randy was in a bit of shock. He said to John, "I don't know how you do it, man." Randy's reaction wasn't at all out of line. He didn't know what to expect. He was taken by surprise, and he was left with questions. He was also touched and is now a managing partner at PASW with a photo from that life-changing day still hanging in his office. The absence of people who are differently abled in the media speaks volumes. By seeing things over and over again, we get desensitized to them. We lose unnecessary fears. We acknowledge that things exist because we've seen them with our own eyes. We know how to handle certain circumstances because we've seen people in the media model them for us. We may not think that we are prejudiced towards people with disabilities, but many people are, and not because they are bad people or because they are malicious, but because they have not had much exposure, and they are, for lack of a better word, ignorant. My dad caught me smoking a cigarette when I was 16 years old. It was the only time in my life that he ever called me stupid. He explained to me that there was a huge difference between ignorance and stupidity. He said, "Jessica Lynn, when I was 16 and smoking, I was ignorant." The ad campaigns, movies, and television back then featured cigarettes. Whether it was a Marlboro Man on the billboards, the hero or the cowboy on TV, the elegant girl by the expensive car, or the poor men taking a smoke break together, you saw it everywhere. Smoking was cool, and thanks to the media, everyone believed it. It took me seeing my grandpa 7 times the year of his slow death before I finally put them down. According to the old marketing adage, the rule of 7, it takes seeing something 7 times before it finally registers. Not before you are familiar with it, but before your subconscious is even aware of it. The media is so powerful in its effects on how we see the world, on how we determine what our wants are, what our needs are, and what we plan to do. It feeds fear, relieves fear, demands attention, determines recognized standards, and gives us the freedom to believe whatever we see. It's time to see something different. We are portraying the wrong image. People who are differently abled are most often being portrayed as sinister or evil, as the objects of pity, as the victim, or as having eternal innocence. And the majority of these parts are being played by people who don't actually have a disability. On the whole, America is ignorant about the harm that we are doing to people who are differently abled because of their inaccurate portrayals in the roles that we see them play. We are ignorant at how the avoidance of eye contact, or the talking really slowly and loudly to a person that has a disability that doesn't involve hearing or processing time affects them. We don't know how to act when we get on an elevator with someone who is visibly disabled. We don't know how to feel if we see someone being fed in a wheelchair at a restaurant. We don't know how to respond, but we can be very subtly shown. Through advertisements, TV, and all media, we can learn how to interact with our fellow humans that, according to disabilityfunders.org, represent the single largest minority group seeking employment in today's marketplace. Their research concludes that people with disabilities are nearly twice as likely as people without disabilities to have an annual household income of $15,000 or less. The unemployment rate of people with disabilities is 10 times greater than the national unemployment rate. Yet many of those unemployed individuals have the skills that employers need. The majority of people with disabilities are poor, undereducated, and underemployed, largely due to unequal opportunities. Disability belongs in any grant-making program that supports diversity, or education, or employment, or housing, or arts and culture, or civic participation, or any other element of life, because people with disabilities are a diverse group, crossing all lines of age, ethnicity, gender, race, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. IMPWD promotes access, accuracy, and inclusion. Access, with reasonable accommodations; accuracy, where people with disabilities are portrayed realistically and proportionately to the real number of people in America who are differently abled; and inclusion in all forms of media. We need to see people with disabilities being cast as our brothers, our sisters, and our friends, not as people to be feared, pitied, or seen as heroic or eternally innocent. Things are beginning to shift, but we're not nearly there yet. The teenage Walt Jr. character on Breaking Bad, played by R.J. Mitt, who has cerebral palsy, both on screen and off, continuously delivers amazing performances in a role where his disability has almost nothing to do with his character. Rodney Jackson's character in Legit, played by Nick Daly, who has Prader-Willi syndrome and is a PASW client, is another good example. According to TheWrap.com co-chair of IMPWD, Christine Bruno, states that the success of these programs reflects the evolving attitudes and appetites of viewers and puts those who create them ahead of the curve, both creatively and financially. Other great strides are being made as well, like Daniel Shaipuk, who was the first person to cruise the runway in a wheelchair during New York's Fashion Week, and the strikingly gorgeous Jillian Mercado, featured in Diesel ads. When I first saw those ads, the very last thing that I saw was her wheelchair. Others trying to change the media views of those who are differently abled include people like Katie Driscoll with her campaign for changing the face of beauty, and Jerry Jewell, who I've had the great pleasure of meeting, that was just a keynote speaker on the Forum for LGBT and Disability Issues just June 19th. As Cousin Jerry from The Facts of Life said 3 decades ago, questions don't hurt, ignorance does. Let's start asking more questions. Let's remove the ignorance. Let us see more. Let's see a busy mom's little girl painting with her toes. Let's see a brother with cerebral palsy being fed at a dinner table on mainstream TV. Let's hear someone with a speech impediment not being teased. Let's see someone rocking back and forth or flapping her hands as part of who she is, not as something to be ridiculed. Let us see a woman with no arms modeling bras. And let's see more of those real-life mannequins to represent all body types. Big ads, various roles, but most importantly, let us see people who are differently abled being interacted with in a way that supports inclusion. Let's light up the screens with more accuracy and with more diversity. The media has that power. The same power that was used to make smoking look cool can now make disabilities look as normal as they really are. The more we see, the more it will transfer into all other areas of life. With a supported employment caseload only, many of the people that I help find jobs for have what are referred to commonly as severe disabilities. Some are non-ambulatory, some have behavioral issues associated with autism, some have Down syndrome or Williams syndrome, or some other classified as significant disability. I don't see them as disabilities though, they're just different abilities. All of my clients can work, and all of them want to work. They all possess incredible skills and talents and hopes and dreams. They've taught me more about real life than any education or training program that I've ever been a part of. How can we help the largest minority group today seeking employment? We can start by closing down sheltered workshops and paying all people fair wages. We can start by getting to know one another on a deeper level. We can start by stopping being afraid, subconsciously or consciously, of people who are different from us. We can start with the media. By including people with disabilities in all aspects of the media, we can educate the public and remove the ignorance that surrounds most disabilities, in turn, making it easier for people with disabilities to find employment, to find housing, and to participate fully in their communities. Society as a whole must become more inclusive. Let's challenge the media. If you are, or if you know of, a writer, a producer, a director, or any person who has even a little bit of influence in the media, open up a conversation. Let's cast for more accurate roles. Let's see people who are differently abled in a broader scope of roles. Let's minimize typecasting. Again, let's make inclusion less shocking. Let's make inclusion more comfortable. Let's make inclusion mainstream. Thank you.